Raise your hand if you or someone you know has ever had someone close to you die. Ra- Raise your hand if you or someone you know has ever started middle school and it was challenging or stressful. Raise your hand if you were upset by the fires on Maui. All of these things alone are super hard, super stressful, and having them all happen at once is pretty challenging. My family and I flew home from a trip to Santa Cruz, California the day before the Maui fires. I had never been on a rougher plane landing. The pilot was having trouble keeping the plane straight. There was some major turbulence. My right ear was bothering me like a horrible earache. And it was all because of the hurricane-force winds that struck Maui right before the fires. I was supposed to start my first year at Seabury, and coming from a small school like Cardin, where we were all big fish in a small pond, the thought of starting a new, bigger school without a lot of my friends was pretty nerve-wracking. Plus, it's middle school. It's said to be some of the hardest times for kids, what with social dynamics, letter grades, and switching classes. And to make matters worse, my orientation had been canceled because there was already a fire in Olinda. I remember how intense the wind was that day, and by late afternoon, we had gotten word that there were multiple fires in Kula, Lahaina, and Kihei. We went to bed that night assuming they would just be put out, and living in Haiku, had we not seen the news, we never would have known anything was wrong. We woke up on what was supposed to be the first day of school, only to learn that Lahaina had been almost completely burned down. Thousands of people had to evacuate or literally run from the fires, and the images were devastating. The whole island was grieving. School finally started, and we had to fly back to Santa Cruz for a cousin's wedding. We were only supposed to be gone for 3 days when my favorite uncle, Aaron, suddenly and unexpectedly died of a heart attack, extending our trip to a week. He had been mountain biking when he passed. It was an odd thing because he was fit and young, only 42, but he had been having chest pains for a while and the doctors just could never figure out why. To this day, it's still a mystery. My cousins and my sister and I are the same ages. Aaron and Kelly, who's my auntie, had Oliver, who's 9 months younger than me, then Wes, who's 6 months older than my younger sister. Our whole lives we've been parallel. We call each other the other Coles because we both share the last name Cole. Because of all these similarities, I can't help but realize just how easily it could have been my dad that's dead right now. That thought is just all too real for me, and it hurts so much to think about Aaron being dead and the impact it causes on the boys and Auntie Kelly. Have you or someone you know ever experienced anxiety? It's a terrible thing. I get very anxious sometimes, something that was triggered a year and a half ago by an incident where my whole family got sick. It's a long story, but basically, if you combine starting middle school, the fires and all of the fear and grief that goes into that, and my uncle dying, I was having a pretty hard time. I got stuck in this cycle of thinking that nothing good was ever going to happen to me again. And when you think super sad thoughts like that, it feels like even the littlest things are terrible. For example, the week after my uncle died, I got a tiny, common cold. It wasn't a big deal, but it brought me down into a tantruming fit like a little child that stemmed from not feeling truly happy in over a month. My anxiety also made me feel stuck in a mindset of thinking that if I didn't worry about the things that may or may not happen in the future, they all would most definitely happen. For example, I couldn't fall asleep every night without saying aloud, "Please don't let anything bad happen to me or my family tonight or tomorrow." When I mentioned to my dad that I felt like I had to worry, he assured me that though that thought process was valid, it was not necessary. He said that even if I didn't say that every night, something bad either would or wouldn't happen, and I have zero effect on what's going to happen in the future. I knew that all along, but my brain really needed to be validated like that, and for someone to tell me that I have no sway over what's going to happen. So, slowly but surely, I began to break the cycles and began to start truly living again and being happy. I tried my best to immerse myself in the things that I love. This included sports, so many sports, and hanging out with old friends, making new friends, and surfing a lot. But then, just a few days after I began deconstructing my whole thought process around my anxiety and losing Aaron, my world imploded again with something so far-fetched and impossible I didn't even believe it at first. A person's chance of getting attacked by a shark is 1 in 11.5 million. You're more likely to die from incidents involving a champagne cork than to die from a shark. In fact, One study estimates that around 24 people a year die from champagne corks. So why did my mom have to get attacked by a shark? She's totally fine, don't worry about it. It only bit her board. But the reality of what could have happened is much more than my imagination could conjure. Some of you may have heard about the woman who was attacked by a shark on October 2nd. That was my mom. The only damage done was a bitten board, a severed leash, and some scrapes from the shark's rough skin. But the story is much more than it sounds. My mom drove to Tavares Bay in the middle of the day on October 2nd to surf. It was the first real swell of the year, so the sand was pretty turned up, but it wasn't exactly murky. She was watching it for a little while, and she saw a couple of boys out on the right peak, so she decided to paddle out, despite feeling unusually jumpy. After catching a couple waves, the boys told her they were going to paddle over to the left peak. That's when the shark decided to inspect her. She didn't notice it until it came up from behind her and slammed into her board, sending her flying into the water. She surfaced, immediately knowing what it was. She looked around but didn't see the shark anywhere. All of a sudden, she felt a huge, rough object coming up underneath her. Looking down, she realized that she was sitting on the shark, riding it like a horse, and holding its dorsal fin. At that moment, my mom knew she could either let the shark take her or she could fight and live for us kids. Swinging her right arm in the air, she brought her closed fist down on the shark's back as hard as she could. The shark started rearing back, trying to bite her. And then she got flung off its back. Again, she resurfaced and looked around for the shark. She saw it swimming towards the left peak, towards the kids. Scrambling onto her bitten board, she shouted at the kids, "Shark, shark, get to shore." She climbed up the rocks and was met by a couple of guys who were watching the whole thing go down. After making sure she was okay, they took a picture of her. In the picture, she's just so in shock that she's actually smiling. Kind of crazy, right? After that whole episode with my mom, she was feeling pretty traumatized. But she forced herself to go surfing at Ho'okipa the very next day. She knew that if she didn't go surfing, she might be too afraid to ever go back out there. And she loves surfing, so that was not an option. She is my role model. She's conquered her fears, and you'll most likely see her at Ho'okipa on any given day of the week if the swell's right. I'm so proud of her. She's the bravest, most awesomest person I ever met. After that whole thing with my mom, I was feeling like I had a huge setback. I was, again, caught in the cycle of worries and fears. But after talking more and more to my parents and my therapist, I started to focus on the little things, like the way my mustard yellow curtains turned my room golden when the sun rose, and how good exercising made me feel. Pretty soon, I felt like I had a good grip on my anxiety, and I stopped doing therapy. I was truly happy. I'm doing pretty good right now. Sure, there are always going to be setbacks, and some more bad things will happen to me, but we really just got to take it one day at a time. It may sound like a cliche, but it's true that living in the present moment is the best way to go. My dad always says that being stuck in the future or the past is the true suffering, because if you're constantly worried about what may or may not happen, you're never happy and living in the present moment. To get out of the cycle of fears and worries, I started by breathing. I recently learned a new breathing technique. It's called Victorious breath. You start by breathing out your mouth and try opening the back of your throat. It should sound a little bit louder than your normal breathing, and that's totally okay. Once you get the hang of opening the back of your throat, try closing your mouth and breathing out your nose while still maintaining the throat thing. It'll probably feel pretty unnatural, but you'll get used to it. I got used to it, and I use it every day. It helps me with my anxiety. I use it to fall asleep. I use it when I'm playing a sport and I need more breath in my lungs, and I'll often just catch myself using it throughout the day subconsciously. Another thing that helps me is a trick that our speaker coach, Annette Lynch, taught me. I shared with her how I felt like I would need to worry and say, "Please don't let anything bad happen to me and my family tonight or tomorrow." She told me that magicians often use this trick. Well, they'll ask a volunteer to come up the stage, and they'll say stuff like, "Don't trip." The volunteer's brain will only focus on the trip part and completely blow past the whole don't. This is a form of manifestation. When I was saying, "Please don't let anything bad happen to me or my family," I was basically manifesting it. because the human brain really hates the word don't. So Annette told me that she uses another form of prayer where she says every night, "Thank you for the new opportunity in my life tomorrow," or "Thank you for the new person in my life tomorrow." This form of prayer acts as something you're grateful for has already happened, even though it hasn't, and this is a form of manifestation. I guess this speech is for everyone, but mostly I want it to be pointed towards the people who feel like I did. You're not alone and you can do it. Thank you.